In the still of the night, we hear the wolf call as it walks around our doors. We hear the howl of the night, the cold creeping into the house, coming to get us. The nights are long, and some might say, if they're fans of certain popular TV shows and books, full of terrors. And so we light candles. We light lamps. In modern day, we put batteries in things and turn them on and plug things in and let the light shine. We have lights so bright that you can't look into them or you'll go blind. Light is a different relationship now than it was back in the olden days. And I feel really weird to say this. I feel like I have a very different relationship with light than many people of even my generation, because I grew up in the country and I remember seeing stars at night, not the luminous glow of the neighboring town or the newer street lights taking the stars away. When I was a kid, the nights were dark and mysterious. That's where our festivals of light were born. In some ways, modern electrified living has cheapened the idea of light. But as we're entering some darker times and dark nights of our collective soul, maybe it's time for us to remember why we have these festivals of light. Let's talk about Christmas, Yule, and all the other holidays, especially Hanukkah, because Hanukkah and Christmas start the same day this year, as we walk together down creation's paths. Hello everyone, my name is Charlie. I'm a Christo-Pagan Druid and Priest of Bridget.
Hello everyone, my name is Brian. I'm a Christo-Pagan Druid and sous chef to the Doctor.
Today we're going to be talking about Festival of Light and why light is important and how we can maybe make light more special in our lives again. I have a very different and, I don't want to say unique, but let's say special relationship with light. And so we're going to bring all of this together in a way that hopefully will help you out with things. And for our friends in the Southern Hemisphere, I would love to know how you relate the summer solstice with Christmas and everything, if that's part of your practice, because I know it's so, I'm one of those people that I think Christmas and White Christmas starts immediately playing in the back of my head. So I would love to hear from our friends in the Southern Hemisphere how summer and Christmas go together for y'all. And for those of you just on the equator, because, I'm sure y'all have different ways of thinking as well. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you're listening to us on. We do original Christo-Pagan and Druid content 5 days a week, Monday through Friday on this podcast, and you don't want to miss a thing. Just a reminder, we will be doing the 12 days of Christmas this year, so for the 12 days of Christmas, you will be getting an original episode every day.
12 days!
12 days in a row.
Now everyone gather together and join with me as we say, "Now child, go to the light."
Oh.
I know, Halloween throwback, but, Poltergeist is awesome. I will hurt her hearing Festivals of Light without her coming in going, "Gonna run to the light, my child." It's like,
We're here.
Oh my. So I think it's important for us to start at one of the earliest myths many of us probably know, and that is really to try to help us get an understanding of how important light is for us as a people. That's the myth of Prometheus. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. Thus, all of our technology is possible, and the gods feared what we would do without our utter reliance upon them. And so they punished Prometheus forever to be strapped to a rock where every day an eagle hacks his liver out and eats it, and then the wound heals and he grows back and comes back to do it again the next day. Because, Greek punishments, they were creative.
but he got better
Every day.
every day.
And so when we're thinking about light, we have to connect it with fire. Because for the vast majority of our history, they were pretty much the same. With the exception of the sun, which really isn't an exception because the sun was believed to be fire in the sky for most of our history.
I mean, it is. It's just really, really far away.
I will stipulate it is because it is a giant ball of plasma.
Yeah.
And the fire that we see is technically plasma. So, okay, I will not, well, actually, even though every fiber of my astronomical self wants to, sure. Fire is how we became modern humans. It is impossible for us to understand how long we've had fire, because if you don't understand how long we've had fire, your jaw is shaped the way it is because we have fire. If you look at our relatives and our ancestors, they had huge, massive jawbones that had huge, massive muscles attached to them because eating raw things is hard. It's very hard. You've noticed this if you tried to eat a raw carrot or anything like that. There's a certain amount of effort that you have to go through to chew up raw foods that is different. There is evidence that Homo sapiens are not the ones who tamed fire, though the question is when we learned how to make fire ourselves, as opposed to when we learned to basically maintain found fire, because, lightning and other things can cause fires, and it is possible to collect a fire, keep fire going, but not know how to create one from scratch should your fire go out. We don't know when we learned how to make fire, but there is evidence that we've had fire for a very, very long time. One of the main lines of evidence about that is our jaw. The jawbone in the Homo genus began shrinking long before Homo sapiens came onto the scene. And the easiest way to understand that is it became easier to chew our food. And well, cooking food makes it both easier to chew, but also provides more nutrients. No matter what anybody tries to tell you, cooking food helps you have bioavailability of the nutrients that are in the food so that you can actually absorb it better. Many of our traits probably came about because of our conquest of fire. And fire helped us out in numerous ways. Fire kept us warm at night. Fire gave us light that in the dark times, which is really a superpower to be able to have light in the darkness. It also gives the ability to scare off predators that are very often afraid of fire. Fire really did make us who we are. We have to start with a ground understanding of that. Most of the people hearing my voice right now grew up where you walked into a room and flipped a switch and there was light. You didn't really think about where the heat in your home was coming from because there was a thermostat on the wall. Heat just happened. Light, heat, warmth are so inextricably entwined. It's no mistake that we have so many traditions based around them and so many fire traditions. Festivals of light are even more important because they almost always are timed around midwinter. Why in midwinter? Because the darkest night of the year is midwinter, where we no longer have the equal amounts of time we had just a while back at the equinox. And now, was there a sun? I can think of quite a few solstices where, because of the clouds and everything, we never saw the sun at all. And sometimes we had storms go through and it was just dark all day.
Even today,
Oh, yeah.
as we get closer to the solstice, the sun sets a lot earlier. It's basically almost sunset now, and it's been overcast all day.
Yeah, we really did this.
And no sun. It was dark gray that is just slowly getting darker as the day progresses.
And so you can see the importance of celebrating fire. There are a lot of fire traditions, but we're only going to talk about 3 of them. That is Hanukkah, Yule, and Christmas. Hanukkah is, to me, the most magical of all of them because it is a celebration of revolt. If you don't know the story of Hanukkah, in brief, the Maccabean revolt helped Judas and his family reclaim Jerusalem. They re-established the Jewish monarchy and Jewish identity and control over the land which they had lost, and they went in to rededicate the temple. The traditional story is they only had enough oil for one day, but the oil burned for 8 nights till that they could do all that they needed to do to procure and virtually cleanse the oil to be used in the holy fire. This is the basic story of Hanukkah. It is a story about revolt. If you actually read the book of Maccabees, the idea of the lamp is very in the background to the original story. And during this time, Jeremiah the prophet returns from heaven with a flaming sword to restore the kingship and the priesthood. It's Lord of the Rings time in here. It's very powerful time. But with all of the Jewish holidays, there is this sense of struggle and triumph over darkness as a huge key component to it, like we see with Passover, like we see with Purim, and like we see here, where they had fought a battle against tremendous odds. In fact, if you don't understand exactly how hard fought their revolt was, our English word macabre, as in dark, scary, related to death, It comes from the word Maccabee, because when you read these stories, they are filled with death and destruction and violence, and it doesn't end well in there. Hanukkah is a holiday that I have found very interesting because it is one of the few holidays called out by name in the New Testament that Jesus practiced. You will notice periodically the word Hanukkah itself does not appear. In the Greek, kind of the translation of Hanukkah does, where Jesus is in a specific place for the Feast of Dedication. That's Hanukkah. I've always found it interesting that this is the story that is in the Gospels. We do have mention of Passover, and we have a kind of oblique reference to Rosh Hashanah at one point. But the one that we see most prominently is this one, which is, again, interesting because Hanukkah has never been a major holiday. It is not one of the major holidays of the Jewish faith. And in Jesus' time, when the Gospels were written, it was not either. It's the symbolic reference of the restoration of the temple, the revolt against the powers that be. All of that symbolism, I think, really ensured that this was of the holidays that got mentioned, that we are focused on both Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedications, and the Passover, the escape from enslavement in Egypt. Thematically, they work best in the story. On Hanukkah, candles are lit each night, prayer, social prayers, songs are sung, gifts are given. It's a thing. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with it. As you know, I truly believe if you want to know about a practice, you should go to those who practice it. So there's some wonderful resources that you can go to find out how Hanukkah is celebrated. I have very weird feelings about whether or not Hanukkah should be practiced by anybody who is not Jewish, especially because Christianity came from Judaism and it is one of the few holidays we see Jesus celebrating. I have always had a weird place in my mind of like, should Christians practice Hanukkah? Because we're supposed to imitate Christ. And he did. Like, it's called out by name.
Yeah, that's why for me, like, it's one of those where I just go,
okay. I tend to be very simple. We have lit candles before. We have thought about how to incorporate this numerous times. I do find myself every year kind of reading those passages because they are a lot of the ones where Jesus is talking in parables. I believe there are actually 8 parables in the story in John of Jesus on the Feast of Dedications. I believe he actually tells 8 parables. So you have one for every day. And I find myself kind of meditating on those and thinking about those. But for me, again, because I have not converted to Judaism, I do not have it as a major part of my practice. It is something that I'm always mindful of. We'll often start reading those stories around when Hanukkah starts. Though, like I said in the intro, the first day of Hanukkah is December 25th this year. And that's kind of magical. I love it when holidays sync up.
yeah.
Yule, I'm not going to talk about a lot, mainly because Yule is confusing. And not because it in and of itself is confusing, but because most of the written stuff we have about Yule were written by Christians after paganism was kind of either people had been converted or forcibly told not to practice the old pagan rites anymore. So we don't have the best record of Yule practice. We have what was the Christianized stories. We have stories that may or may not connect back to Yule. The purpose of things like the Yule log are muddled because many of the earliest accounts of the Yule log start comparing it to various things from the Bible. And, I don't think the Germanic peoples that were doing this had that in mind when they were doing it originally. That's why I say it's confusing. And it's especially hard. Pagans, we all need to get better about this, citing our sources for things. It is really hard to distinguish between unverified personal gnosis, wishful thinking, and something that can be pointed to in the lore. Because a lot of resources on holidays like this do not specifically cite where things are coming from. They will blanketly say, well, the Anglo-Saxons did this, or the Scandinavians did this, or the Vikings did that, or the Germans did this. That's wonderful. That may be the oral tradition that has come down to you. Again, there's nothing wrong with citing oral tradition as long as you make clear that you are citing oral tradition. Like, there you go. It's done. I find trying to study Yule very confusing because it depends on the resources you're reading. Some will say this is absolutely historically true. And then you read another source and they're like, we can't find any evidence of this practice prior to this date. So it may be a Christian thing, or just maybe this is when the Christians wrote about it. I find Yule confusing.
Here's a little personal notice. I grew up in a household. We had a fireplace. The coldest of winter, you're always trying to feed the fire, and the logs that were easier to put in the fire didn't burn as long. My father is an engineer, so of course he applied his engineering rationale to it and figured out the optimum shape and size of a log for burning overnight. And this kind of growing up got muddled in with this idea of the Yule log in my head. It's like the one log that is just big enough to fit in there without snuffing out any of the fire. And as it lights up in and of itself, it burns so bright, it would literally go the entire night on its own. Nothing else had to be added to it. It would burn through the morning and go partway into the day before you could even add any logs back in there. Oftentimes I think of Yule and Yule log in that sense of like, this is that ideal, the one log to rule them all. Have there to light through the longest, darkest, and coldest of nights. Sometimes I would sit and watch this log in the wee hours of the morning. It was also fascinating to just stare and meditate upon it because it wasn't just like a little flame source burning that you get some of the neat bits. You had like this entire world ecosystem because it was such a huge log. There were so many different parts you could stare at that were burning in different amounts.
Honestly, that may be closer to how the Yule log was originally, because remember, this is the longest night of the year.
Yeah.
So finding a log that would burn all night.
Yeah. That was just big enough to fit in there, but not so big that you burn the whole house down. And not so big that it puts the fire out.
That may be the very practical origins of something like this. I grew up in houses that were wood heated, that we burned wood to have heat in winter. If we didn't have the wood chopped, if we didn't have the wood stacked, if we didn't have the wood, we were cold. The fire had to be fed periodically, and the ashes had to be cleaned out and everything like that. That was a lot of my childhood was in homes that were heated by wood. And I can see how mythos could really come around to that, because there was always the one larger log that would be put in at night so that it could go all night, but it was always put in a special place in the wood stove because it would be able to slowly catch on fire while the other fire was burning, and those embers would then catch into the log, and it would burn throughout the night and still be warm enough that in the morning, when the fires wouldn't have to be relit.
These weren't split either. These were from a tree of just the right diameter. So in a way, it was almost even from a special tree that fell and was cut. It's really interesting when thought in that terms. It could also be more of the origin.
I think that's very, very likely, because it's hard for us to remember today that a festival of light is a festival about survival. We as humans depend on fire in ways that we are not really ready to think about anymore, because we have electricity and gas and all of the other things that make fire cheap and easy. Like I said, most of us grew up flipping a switch and there's light. So we don't have that connection to the vital nature of fire and light that we used to have. Now, Christmas has become a festival of light really starting only in the Victorian era. That's a very modern way to think of Christmas. You could kind of, I guess, say that the Christmas star was possibly a connection to a festival of light back in the day, back in the original telling, based on the fact that that was the Magi. That was probably an astrological sign, not an actual star or comet, though there are possibilities. There was apparently a comet. There was also apparently a supernova that both happened at roughly the right time for it to maybe have been the Christmas star and what have you. And there's a lot of talk and discussion about that. But it wasn't really a vital part of the story, which again makes sense. This is a story that comes out of the Middle East. This is a story that comes from us closer to the equator, where we're not having the deep snows that you would expect in far northern or far southern climates. It's understandable. For me, where this becomes an interesting connection to the older stories of Christmas, there is one telling of the Christmas story that takes place. The story, I believe, was written in the 300-400s and tells us that on the night that Jesus was born, all the people in Arabia knew, because on that night, all of the phoenixes burst into flame, and the firebirds took to the sky and flew around, which, again, looking at what does light mean, what does fire mean, this is quite literally rebirth, right? A phoenix burns to ashes and comes back as first bird of fire. Very much rebirth imagery all around. But again, it wasn't a common part of the story. We have added this through the Victorian, adding light to the Christmas trees. In fact, we have the Victorians to thank for the Christmas tree. Yes, I know it originated in Germany, but it was Queen Victoria, whose German husband brought it to the palace, that popularized the idea of having a Christmas tree and helped it spread more universally from there. And something that really became much more ubiquitous with the advent of electric lights. Christmas as a festival of light in that way really is a modern thing. Christmas was more traditionally a feast day, which yes involves fire and light as far as all that goes, but its association with light, maybe somebody would read from one of the Gospels that Jesus was light and this is the night that Jesus was born. Even the early infancy Gospels don't really mention light at Jesus' birth. They do mention time stopping in several of them, but there's not like this light that fills the cave in most of the stories. It does appear in several of them, but this is a very modern way of thinking of Christmas as a festival of light. I find that hilarious for a couple reasons. One, because we tend to believe that what we believe now is what has always been believed. And so people who are trying to say, well, this is Sol Invictus. If this was Sol Invictus, which by the way was December 21st, not 25th, but if this was Sol Invictus, then the Invincible Sun, which was a festival in Rome that had been co-opted by Christians, it would have a lot more solar imagery to it. It would have a lot more light and fire imagery to it. That is really something we don't see. We see sporadic stories of like the Yule log, which is probably a pagan rite that was co-opted in. There's a good idea that the Christmas tree had something to do with Yggdrasil, the tree of life. Again, that's tentative. We don't have a strong tradition linking back so that we can say that absolutely. When we think of Christmas, it's time to put out the lights. We have made it into a festival of light. And as such, that allows us to imbue those lights with the meaning that we want to have. I grew up in a family where when we put lights on the Christmas tree, we were decorating the tree of life from the garden. And the lights were the fruits of that tree that were glowing with the light of truth and knowledge and stuff. And my grandparents and great-grandparents would talk about that when we were doing the tree, that this was the other tree in the garden. But that's a modern story. Even if it's a story we can trace back to the Victorian era, it's still a modern story. If we want this to have significance to us, because I think we are all on this quest for meaning, the best thing for us to do is to ascribe the meanings we want it to have. Tell your own stories. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which we talked about a little bit on yesterday's episode, is a festival of light story. His nose literally glows and helps them get through the fog, right? Get through the darkest night. We have started creating myths of light stories. And who knows what this festival will end up having for us.
It's one of the reasons why I find so much joy in all the modern Christmas lights.
Yeah.
It is literally the lights are out to run off the darkness.
Yep.
To run off the spookies of the night, you know.
It's a beautiful thing. So I know you probably came to this episode hoping that we would tell you all of the stories about how Christmas is a festival of light and not well, it kind of sort of wasn't, but is now. But that's the liberation that we're trying to bring to people. We tend to overburden ourselves with tradition. We don't really know what the Yule log was for. We don't really know what the Christmas tree was used for. We don't really know why we put lights on the Christmas tree. We don't know why we put lights on our houses. These are all fairly recent in this grand scheme of things, traditions that keep morphing and changing over time. That gives us freedom to make those things mean what we need them to mean for us. So tell your own stories. Find your own hope, find your own meaning, find your own peace. We will make this a wonderful, joyous time and festival of light. I hope you enjoyed this. What did the Christmas lights mean to you? Let me know down in the comments. If you're listening to us on Spotify or YouTube, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they're lying. They won't let us know. So you can leave a comment there because engagement is magic, but then head over to creationspast.com, click on chat, and you can leave a comment there, and we will be able to see it and get back to you. Thank you to everybody who has been so vibrant in the chats. It really is helpful. I love talking to y'all. While you're over at Creations Past, if you have a few dollars you can pass our way, think about joining a membership that helps us keep the lights on, keep food on our table, and a roof over our heads. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both.
Favu fore, dahu dore. Welcome Christmas, bring your cheer. Welcome Christmas, all far and near. Christmas Day will always be just so long as we have we. Welcome Christmas, bring your light. Welcome Christmas. Favu fore, dahu dore.
Amen.